Charleston smelled like salt and old money the night my name finally carried across a room that once refused to hear it. I waited behind the curtain in a white suit that felt like armor and watched the stage through a strip of glass. Under a warm cone of light hung my canvas. Solace at Dawn, the same painting my mother sold for $10 when I was 22. The blues held still as a breath, and a vein of gold climbed the center, like a pulse returning. The catalog called it a defining work, but I remembered rain on a driveway and a cardboard sign that read $10 each. The hall hummed with low talk and the cough of cameras. My mother sat in the front row with perfect posture and pearls that caught the light. She had not seen me enter. She had not guessed that the name about to be read belonged to the daughter she once called impractical. The auctioneer tapped his gavel and the room bowed toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we open with Solace at Dawn. Opening bid at $1,800,000. The figure did not surprise me. Years of invoices and rejections had taught me how value gathers in quiet rooms. What struck me was the sound my mother made, a small gasp that broke the neat line of her mouth. A paddle rose. Another followed. The number climbed like a tide. My mother searched the catalog with a trembling finger. I saw the moment she found the line she never expected. Artist Margot Reeves. Her face went still, then pale, then flushed with heat she could not hide. The shift moved through the first rows like wind through grass. Inside me, the past stood up and spoke, my canvases leaning against a folding table, a stranger buying 3 and walking away with months of nights, my mother folding $30 and saying at last something useful. I learned that day how easy it is to misprice a life. In the hall, the bids rose. $1,000,009, $1,000,009.50. I felt $2 million coming like a wave you hear before you see it. My mother sat as if the chair burned. Her friend whispered. The other stared at the catalog as if paper could correct itself. I did not step out. Not yet. I wanted my mother to sit inside the distance between what she had believed and what this room now believed. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. In the bright pause, a memory pressed its palm against the glass. I saw my younger hands smudged with blue and the cheap brush losing hairs. I smelled rain and cut grass and the thin metal scent of coins. I heard my mother say, "Art is a hobby, and bills are facts." I remembered counting tips at midnight and stretching rice and eggs for a week. I remembered wrapping canvases in thrift store sheets and praying they would matter. I thought of the first critic who called my work sentimental and moved on. I thought of the second who said not yet and sent a kind note. I thought of the third who bought a print and told a friend. Every small proof had stacked itself quietly until the sum looked like faith. My mother had never seen the stack, only the mess on the table. Tonight the room could see both the work and the cost. $2 million even he called. Do I have $2,050,000? The pause that followed was bright and clean, like a door waiting to open. In that stillness, I remembered the apartment with peeling paint, the coffee shop mornings, the months when the power failed, and I painted by candle, rather than surrender what kept me human. I remembered the first online sale for $40 and the way I held that receipt like a passport. I remembered the Austin Gallery where a curator told me to stop asking permission and start sending invoices. I sent one to myself as well, a promise due upon arrival. The room exhaled. A paddle rose again. $2 million, the auctioneer said, smiling now, going once. I stepped forward until my reflection floated on the glass. My mother stared at the canvas as if the paint might confess a different author. Surely not the same piece. Surely not that daughter. But the world had learned a new measure. It had learned the price of mornings and bruised knuckles and the quiet refusal to quit when no one clapped. The auctioneer raised his gavel higher, and the room began to applaud before the strike, a rolling sound like rain after a drought. I let the curtain fall back an inch and spoke to the air between us where our old arguments still floated. $10, Mom. Best investment you ever made." The gavel fell with a clean wooden kiss. Sold. The word cracked the ears and let the light in. People stood. Cameras flashed. A reporter turned to find the artist. I felt the warm pull of an ending that was also a beginning. My mother did not stand. She gripped the catalog as if it were the only solid thing left and stared at my name until the letters blurred. Her friends were speaking, but their words slid off the shell of her shock. I thought of the younger me, who had watched her work leave for the price of a takeout dinner. I wanted to tell her there would be a night when velvet ropes guarded her colors, and a room would go quiet because they finally understood. The stage manager touched my sleeve and said they are asking for a photograph. I nodded because I had planned to walk into this light. I waited one more heartbeat for my mother to look up because a small part of me was still the daughter who wanted to be seen, not as a cost, but as an answer. When she finally raised her head, our eyes met through the glass. Recognition moved across her features like weather over water. Shock, calculation, something that might have been regret. I offered her nothing with my gaze, not forgiveness, not punishment, only the truth that value changes when the right eyes see it. Then I turned toward the stage, and the cameras and the nameplate and the life I had bought in small payments over 2 decades. Behind me, the curtain began to close. The past went quiet except for one sentence I had waited years to say, simple as breath and sharp as justice. $10, Mom. Remember. In the spring of 2004, Charleston carried that soft humidity that made every surface shine like it had just been washed. I was 22, living in my parents' beige house on Lakeview Drive, painting in the garage because the smell of oil colors bothered my mother. Helen Reeves believed in savings accounts and sensible shoes. She kept a notebook of every expense and wrote in tidy columns while the television muttered about interest rates. My sister Joanne was 25, already working at the Coastal Bank. Each night, our dinners sounded like briefings. Joanne talked about her promotion and the new branch office. My mother praised her efficiency and said stability is the real art. When it was my turn to speak, I mentioned a painting I had finished that morning, a quiet piece of a river at dawn. My father was gone by then, and Helen filled the space with rules. She smiled without looking at me and said, "Art does not pay the bills, stability does." Joanne laughed softly and asked if I planned to sell it on the sidewalk. I laughed too, but my hands went cold. I worked part-time at a cafe near Broad Street and painted at night under a single lamp. The garage was small, but it was mine. Over 2 years, I filled every wall with canvases. When neighbors dropped by, they admired them politely the way people admire other people's pets. On a Saturday morning in May, I finished my shift at the cafe and drove home thinking about a new series I wanted to start. The street was lined with cars and the front yard looked strangely empty. Then I saw the sign stuck in the grass, "Yard sale, everything must go." Tables stretched across the driveway covered in dishes, old curtains, lamps, and books. At the far end leaned my paintings stacked like forgotten furniture. Each had a bright sticker, $10 each. I stopped breathing. My mother stood by the folding table, smiling at a woman from down the block. When she saw me, she waved, like this was a pleasant surprise. Before I could speak, a man picked up one of my larger canvases, The River at Dawn, and asked how much. She said 10 each, firm price. He nodded, pulled out a bill, and handed it to her. The cash looked small in her careful fingers. She slipped it into a tin box. He bought 2 more and left whistling. My mother said she finally made $30. I could barely hear her over the noise in my head. I asked why she was selling them. She said they were taking space and no one wanted them anyway. Joanne had told her a tidy house means a tidy mind. When a neighbor admired the colors and asked who painted them, Helen said, "My daughter, but she is between jobs, so I thought I would clear some space." Laughter followed. Something inside me cracked like paint, drying too fast. I told her those were not hers to sell. She frowned and said they were clutter, and I should thank her for helping. I said, "Give me the money, I will buy them back." She opened the tin box, counted 3 tens, and then looked up, almost amused. "Oh, honey, he paid cash and I already spent it on propane." The words hung in the air, dull and final. My sister walked out holding a cup of lemonade and said, "Do not start drama. Margot Mom is trying to help you grow up." The man who bought the paintings waved from his car. He said his wife loved local art. My mother waved back. I went to the garage. The walls looked wounded where the canvases had hung. The air smelled of dust and turpentine. I sat on the concrete floor for a long time, trying to remember how it felt to believe that beauty could be enough. When the last visitor left, my mother came in with a broom and said, "You can paint more when you get a real job." I asked if she had ever thrown away something she loved. She said yes, my patience. I packed my brushes, tubes of color, and the few canvases she had not touched. Rain began to fall, a slow southern drizzle that carried the smell of magnolia. I loaded the car and closed the trunk. My mother stood on the porch with her arms crossed. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Somewhere my work can breathe." Joanne called from the doorway that I was being dramatic. I looked at the driveway where a few coins had fallen from the tin box and rolled into the grass. $10 each. My paintings worth less than lunch. The rain turned heavier as I drove away. In the mirror, I saw the yard sign collapse under the water. At a red light, I pulled a scrap of paper from my bag and wrote a single line. "Next time you sell my art, send an invoice." I taped it to the dashboard to remind myself that one day I would make every dismissal payable in full. When night came, I stopped at a gas station just past the bridge. My hands were trembling, but the feeling beneath was not sadness. It was something sharper, a promise forming. The world outside smelled of wet earth and gasoline. Somewhere behind me, $30 of my heart hung in a stranger's house, and my mother was balancing her accounts. I looked at my stained fingers and whispered that the next time she counted profit, she would have to spell my name to do it. Then I started the engine and drove toward Savannah, not knowing that the road ahead would become the gallery of my revenge. Savannah smelled of salt and coffee when I arrived with 2 boxes of canvases and a jar of brushes that clinked like coins. The city was smaller than Charleston, but it had color and space, and no one who called my art a hobby. I rented a single room above a bait shop near the river where the paint peeled from the walls and the ceiling hummed with old water pipes. The rent was $200 a month if I paid on time and $220 if I was late. Most months, I was late. I found a job at a cafe called Harbor Light. The owner, a round man with a quiet voice, said I could work the morning shift if I promised to smile at tourists. I smiled until my cheeks hurt and poured coffee until my wrists ached. At night, I painted under a small lamp that buzzed and cast a circle of light barely big enough to see the canvas. When the electricity was cut off the first time, I bought a pack of candles and painted by their flicker. The shadows moved across the walls like spectators, and I told myself that every artist worked under uncertain light. The second time the power went out, I borrowed a flashlight from the neighbor below me, a retired mechanic who lived on sweet tea and old baseball games. When I could not pay him back, I handed him a punch card from the cafe that said, "Buy 10 coffees, get 1 free," and told him it was currency where I came from. He laughed until he coughed and told me I reminded him of his granddaughter. That small laugh felt like rent paid in kindness. Some nights, a customer from the cafe stopped by to pick up a coffee and look at my work. One woman in pearls studied a painting of the river and asked if I could make the sky match her sofa. I told her, sure, art is just wallpaper with emotions. She did not catch the edge in my voice, but she bought a muffin and left a $2 tip. I learned to stretch those dollars. I painted on recycled boards and scraps of cardboard, and when I ran out of brushes, I trimmed my hair and taped the strands to a stick. Around Christmas of 2006, I sent my mother $50 inside a card that showed a snowman holding a paintbrush. She sent it back with a note written in her neat blue ink. "Keep it, you will need it for rent." I read the sentence 3 times until the words blurred. She was right, I needed it. But the way she was right made it feel like a curse. I began to sell small prints online through a site called Etsy. My username was Harbor Dawn. The shop made $70 a month when sales were good. I listed a piece every Sunday and watched the counter climb by single digits. Every sale felt like proof that I existed. One afternoon in 2007, while looking for reference photos, I searched my own name out of boredom. The first result stopped my breath. A painting of the river with my signature faint in the corner was listed on eBay for $1,200. I stared at it until the letters swam. It was one of the canvases from the yard sale. The seller's name was William Howard, the same old man who had bought 3 that morning while my mother smiled. I read the description. Local artist, unknown, rare early work. He even spelled the title wrong. My pulse hammered. Mom sold my art and he resold my pain. That night, I walked to the river and watched the lights move on the surface like broken promises. The anger was clean and bright, and it kept me warm. I decided to learn how to protect myself. I borrowed books from the library about copyright law and art licensing. I learned how to register a work, how to send cease and desist letters, how to write invoices that sounded like armor. I attended a workshop at the local gallery and asked more questions than anyone else. The curator, a woman named Marla, told me to keep receipts for every canvas because someday proof would matter more than apology. I began to sign my name with a flourish so large it could not be cropped out. I saved for weeks until I had enough to buy back the painting from eBay. The auction ended on a Friday. I placed a bid in the last minute using a new credit card I had opened under Margot Reeves, not intentionally, but because the online form had auto-filled her name from an old shared account we once used for gas money. The payment went through. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I ignored it. Then a text arrived from Joanne. "Did you just buy something on my card?" I imagined her sitting at her tidy desk at the bank, frowning at the statement. I typed back, "Yes. Consider it a family refund." She did not answer. Later, my mother called, but I let it ring until her voice faded into the night. The painting arrived a week later, wrapped in brown paper. I unrolled it carefully and found the colors brighter than I remembered, as if the journey had given them courage. I hung it above the narrow bed where I slept and told it we were starting over. That small act felt like revenge, though no one else knew it had happened. The following month, a critic from a small local blog mentioned my Etsy shop, calling it tender realism with backbone. The phrase stuck in my mind. I wrote it on the wall above the light switch so that every time the power failed, I could still see it in the candle glow. By 2008, I had sold enough prints to pay the rent on time twice in a row. It was not success, but it was motion. Sometimes customers at the cafe recognized my name from the online shop and asked for autographs on napkins. Other times, they asked if I would paint their dog. I did both. One night, the retired mechanic knocked on my door holding a newspaper folded to the classifieds. He said the bait shop downstairs was closing and the space might be rented cheap. He thought I should open a gallery. I laughed until tears came. A gallery with no heat, no lights, and one painting bought back on a borrowed card. But the idea stayed with me. Maybe space did not have to be large to matter. I began to think of my apartment as the first exhibition. Every brushstroke was a declaration that I was still here. When the city filled with summer tourists, I worked extra hours and painted scenes of the market and the harbor. They sold well enough that I could send another 50 to my mother. This time, she did not return it, but she did not thank me either. Her silence was the same as before, a kind of accounting that never balanced. By the end of that year, the wall above my bed held 6 finished pieces and one promise written in pencil. They will know my name, and she will have to say it aloud. I blew out the candle and let the smoke drift upward until it touched the ceiling like a quiet applause for survival. By the summer of 2010, I had not seen my mother in 6 years. Savannah had given me a kind of quiet strength. But Charleston was still home, no matter how much I tried to forget it. I returned with a small car filled with canvases and a few pieces that had begun to sell at local fairs. My mother greeted me at the door as if she had been waiting to confirm a suspicion. "You finally gave up," she said, her arms crossed and her tone smooth like an accountant closing a file. I smiled and said I came to visit, not surrender. The house smelled the same lemon polish and distant resentment. Joanne arrived that evening with her boyfriend Mark, a man who owned a bank branch downtown and wore confidence like a tailored suit. Dinner was served at 6 sharp. The table looked like a boardroom. Mark talked about interest rates and stock portfolios, while my sister nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had been right all along. My mother poured wine and looked at me. So she said, "You sell enough to cover health insurance yet?" I looked at the table, then at the napkin folded like a balance sheet and said, "Not yet, but my paintbrush is tax deductible." The joke hung in the air for half a second before Mark laughed loudly and Joanne followed. My mother smiled the way people smile at a child repeating a lesson they never believed. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of polite questions and quiet judgments. When dessert came, a lemon tart my mother had bought not baked, she asked if I planned to stay long. "Just a week," I said. "I wanted to show you something." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The next morning, I gave her a small abstract painting wrapped in brown paper. The colors were layered like memories that refused to fade. At the bottom right corner, I had signed one word, receipt. She unwrapped it, tilted her head, and asked if it meant something. "It means what you think it means," I said. She chuckled and hung it in the dining room near the cabinet where she kept her collection of porcelain figurines. That night, I overheard her on the phone telling a friend that I was still painting nonsense, but at least it matched the curtains. I did not mind. The painting was where I wanted it to be. Months later, a journalist writing about Southern art movements visited the house for a feature on family collections. He photographed that wall, and the caption beneath the picture read, "The Irony of Value." The image spread online, and people called it poetic. Strangers laughed and wrote that she hung the receipt. My mother never understood why the phrase became popular, but she stopped answering questions about it. I found out through a friend who sent me the article clipped from the newspaper. When I called to ask if she liked the attention, she said it was just a silly thing people did on the internet. Her voice was sharp, but I could hear the embarrassment underneath. Joanne called that same week to invite me to dinner at her new apartment. It was in a freshly painted building near the river, all glass and steel, and the faint smell of money. When I arrived, she opened the door wearing a silk blouse that matched the beige of the walls. Mark poured wine again and asked if I had any investments. I told him paint and time were my stocks. He smiled politely. Joanne gave me a tour of the place and showed me the kitchen she said she had always dreamed of. The marble counters gleamed, and a framed certificate from her bank hung on the wall. When we sat down, she said casually that she was glad Mom had helped with the down payment. I looked up. "What do you mean, helped?" She hesitated, then said the college fund Mom had saved for you was just sitting there, and since you were not using it, she thought it made sense to put it to work. I felt the air leave the room. The words sounded reasonable the way theft sometimes does when wrapped in logic. "You mean my college fund," I said. Joanne nodded. "You were never going to use it for school," she said, "and besides, the market is better for property than degrees." I stared at her, and then at Mark, who suddenly found his glass interesting. "My mother," I asked, "agreed to this." "Of course she did," Joanne said. She said it was family money and family benefits together. I did not shout. I did not cry. I just felt something close, quietly inside me. "You are right," I said finally. "I will earn my own." She looked relieved, as if the matter were settled. On the way out, I glanced at a painting on her wall, a print from a catalog that imitated the colors I had used years ago. She said she liked it because it matched the couch. The same words the woman with the pearls had used. The irony made me smile in spite of everything. When I returned to my mother's house that night, the lights were on in the dining room. The painting called Receipt glowed softly under the chandelier. I stood there a long time watching it, thinking about the ledger she had kept all her life, the one where worth was measured by numbers and not by meaning. I went to the attic and found the old folder labeled College Fund. Inside were bank statements and a letter she had once written, promising to keep the money safe until I decided what to study. I sat on the floor reading it while the house creaked around me. Then I took the folder to the backyard, struck a match, and watched the papers curl into ash. "Fine," I whispered, "you bought her apartment. I will buy my future." The flames bent toward the sky like brush strokes on a dark canvas. When they died, I felt lighter, almost free. The next morning, I left before anyone woke. I drove away with my canvases and the faint smell of smoke on my clothes. The road stretched ahead, wide and uncertain, and for the first time, I did not feel lost. I felt solvent. Austin smelled like hot asphalt and hope when I arrived in the spring of 2011. I rented a studio apartment on East 6th Street above a tattoo shop. The rent was $600 a month, the walls were cracked, and the pipes made a sound like laughter when the water ran. I ate ramen. Most nights drank dollar coffee from the corner store and painted until dawn. My mattress sat on the floor beside jars of brushes and a fan that clicked every third turn. The city was noisy but kind. Musicians played on the sidewalks and artists sold their work at pop-up markets where people cared less about pedigree and more about emotion. I joined the Saturday art walk and set up a folding table under a flickering streetlight. My canvases leaned against milk crates, the paint still smelling faintly of turpentine. Most people stopped, smiled, and moved on. One man asked if I took Venmo. I said I take validation. He laughed, handed me $5, and walked away with a small sketch. That small exchange felt like a beginning. Over the next 2 years, I painted everything around me, the rain streaking down murals, the quiet moments between songs, the shadows under neon signs. My style shifted from realism to something more stripped bare. I called it quiet resilience. The name came from a woman who bought one of my paintings and said it felt like breathing after holding your breath too long. By 2013, I had enough pieces to apply for local exhibitions. Most rejections were polite. Then one afternoon, a young woman stopped at my booth during the art fair. She wore round glasses and carried a tote bag full of catalogs. She introduced herself as Olivia Grant, a curator from a small gallery downtown. She said she saw something in my work that felt like survival without bitterness. 2 weeks later, she called and offered me a solo exhibition. The show would be titled Quiet Resilience. I said yes before she finished the sentence. For the next 6 months, I lived on adrenaline and caffeine. I painted 12 large canvases, each capturing a fragment of the years I had lost. The night before the opening, I could not sleep. I walked along the street, the air thick with heat, and thought about the garage where it had all begun. When the doors of the gallery opened that evening, the space filled quickly. People moved slowly from painting to painting, whispering words like strength and grace. Reporters took photos, and Olivia introduced me to critics who nodded thoughtfully as if they had known me all along. The Austin Chronicle published a feature the next day titled From Yard Sales to Art Shows. The headline made me laugh until I cried. It was both insult and victory wrapped in 5 words. The article went viral in local circles. Old classmates sent messages saying they always knew I would make it. Joanne texted congratulations with a smiley face. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew it was her. That night, my phone rang with a Charleston number. My mother's voice came through sharp as ever. "Nice PR stunt," she said, "but do not get carried away." I stood by the window watching the city lights blink like stubborn stars. "Oh, I am not carried," I said, "I am driving." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. She asked if I was making any real money. I said enough to buy propane if I ever needed it. She did not respond. After that call, I sat at my desk and wrote her an invitation to the next show. The card was simple white with silver letters. At the bottom, I added 1-line tickets, $20. It was part joke, part test. I mailed it without expectation. She never came. She told Joanne later that it was too expensive for a daughter's hobby. I framed that sentence in my head like another painting proof that some people cannot see value until someone else puts a price on it. The following years blurred into work and small victories. My art began to sell beyond Austin galleries in Dallas, and Santa Fe requested pieces, and collectors started to ask for commissions. I hired an assistant and finally turned the lights on without worrying about the bill. Every success carried the echo of that yard sale sign, but now it sounded like applause. By 2015, Quiet Resilience had traveled to 3 states. Tickets for the final Austin showing sold out in 2 days and then appeared on resale sites for $400 each. I saw the number printed on the screen and laughed until my stomach hurt. Somewhere my mother still thought 20 was too much. The irony tasted sweet and quiet, the kind of satisfaction that does not need witnesses. Olivia called that night and said a major magazine wanted to feature me in a piece about women redefining Southern art. I said they should call my mother for the definition of value. She laughed and said maybe one day. When the article came out, it used a photo of me, standing in front of a canvas filled with warm reds and deep blues. The caption read, "Margot Reeves paints the cost of endurance." I cut it out and pinned it to my wall. It was the first time I felt seen, not as a disappointment, but as a ledger finally balanced. Sometimes after midnight, I would make ramen, sit by the open window and watch the street below. The city hummed with life. Somewhere, a musician played the same 3 chords again and again, chasing his own quiet resilience. I thought about sending my mother the magazine, but decided against it. The distance between us had become a frame that made everything clearer. She had her numbers, I had my colors. Both were real, but only one could breathe. The night of the closing show, I stood by the gallery door signing programs. A woman approached, holding the first invitation I had ever sent. She said she had bought it from an online auction because it was part of art history now. I looked at the small print at the bottom, tickets $20, and smiled. When she left, I turned off the lights and whispered a small thank you to the past. The revenge was not loud. It was measured elegant and paid in full. The summer of 2018 carried the same thick air Savannah always had, humid and forgiving. I returned not as a waitress or a tenant, but as an artist, invited to the Savannah Art Museum's annual group exhibition. The show was called Southern Light, and the curator had asked me to present 3 paintings from my Quiet Resilience series, including a new piece titled Solace at Dawn. The museum's glass atrium reflected the river beyond, and the light that spilled through felt almost holy. I arrived early wearing a simple black dress and carrying my sketchbook instead of a purse. The walls shimmered with fresh paint and anticipation. Reporters moved around with clipboards, photographers checked their flashes, and volunteers arranged hors d'oeuvres on trays. I stood by the corner of my display watching people filter in, murmuring about composition and meaning those fragile words that used to make me small. The nameplate read Margot Reeves, Austin, Texas. I traced the letters once with my finger, grounding myself in the weight of my own name. Around 7, the room filled completely. The scent of perfume mixed with wine and conversation. I overheard fragments, color theory, perspective, emotional honesty. I tried to let it wash over me without vanity, but a part of me waited for something I could not name. I did not have to wait long. From across the room, I caught a voice I had not heard in years, sharp, confident, unmistakable. My mother's. She entered with a small group of women from her church society, their silver necklaces catching the light like polished armor. They carried programs in hand, whispering in admiration at the displays. My mother's hair had turned nearly white, but her posture was the same upright, certain. I froze behind one of the partition walls, watching her through the reflection of the glass. She did not see me. She walked slowly toward my section, drawn perhaps by the brightness of the colors. She stopped in front of Solace at Dawn. The painting showed a figure standing in shallow water under a rising sun, the hues of gold and violet mixing like forgiveness. A small crowd gathered discussing the emotion in the brushwork. My mother tilted her head and said with her familiar tone of superiority, "My daughter used to paint like that before she wasted her time." The women laughed politely. Before I could move, a man nearby turned toward her holding a camera and a press badge. He said quietly, "That is your daughter." My mother blinked. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the heat outside. The crowd turned as one. A ripple of silence passed through the room, swallowing every sound except the faint hum of the air conditioner. The photographer raised his camera instinctively. My mother's face went pale first, then flushed red, the kind of red that burns without fire. She tried to form words, but none came. Her hands shook as she clutched the edge of her program. The church ladies stared at her as if she had turned into the exhibit. Cameras began to click. Someone whispered, "That's her mother." The phrase traveled through the crowd like static. I stepped forward from the side corridor, calm and deliberate, the way one approaches a canvas that has waited too long to be finished. My heels echoed softly on the marble floor. When I reached her, she still looked stunned, caught between pride and disbelief. I smiled not cruelly, but with the steadiness of someone who has already survived. "Some things appreciate over time," I said, "even daughters." A hush fell so deep that I could hear the sound of camera shutters snapping. Then someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, the entire gallery joined applause, rising like rain on a roof. My mother blinked rapidly, her mouth trembling. She tried to smile, but it collapsed halfway. The curator approached and shook my hand, congratulating me on the turnout, unaware of the private storm he had just walked through. My mother stepped back, murmuring something about needing air. The women from her church stood frozen eyes darting between us. I let her leave. There was nothing left to prove. The cameras followed her retreat, the light bouncing off her pearls. I turned back to the painting. It looked brighter than before, as if it too exhaled relief. A reporter asked me about the title, and I said it was about finding peace in recognition, not from others, but from oneself. Later, after the speeches and toasts, a journalist from a local station approached. He said the footage of my mother's reaction had been caught live and was already circulating online. I nodded. He asked if I wanted to comment. I told him art speaks louder than apology. He smiled and thanked me for the quote. By the time the night ended, the hashtag "She Hung the Receipt" resurfaced on social media, this time paired with my painting and a still of my mother's shocked expression. The irony was almost too poetic to be real. I did not post or respond. I went back to the quiet hotel room overlooking the river, took off my shoes, and sat on the windowsill. Below, the city lights shimmered on the water like pieces of gold leaf. I thought of the first time I painted by candlelight, the shadows trembling on the wall. I thought of the yard sale, the propane, the $10 price tags. And I thought of the moment tonight when an entire room had seen the truth without me needing to raise my voice. That was justice in its purest form. The next morning, headlines appeared, "Artist confronts her past at Savannah exhibit and the cost of recognition." Olivia called from Austin, laughing and crying at the same time. She said, "Margot, this is everywhere." I told her I only wanted my work to speak. She said it did louder than any speech. My mother did not call. Joanne texted 2 words I saw. I replied, "I know." The exhibition stayed open for 6 weeks and drew record attendance. People stood in front of Solace at dawn, taking pictures, whispering about redemption and time. I never corrected them. Some saw it as revenge, others as grace. For me, it was both. When I left Savannah again, I drove past our old house. The yard was smaller than I remembered. The porch light was on, though it was broad daylight, as if someone had forgotten to turn it off. I did not stop. I had already been seen. By 2019, my name had become part of conversations I once thought belonged to other people. Reeves Atelier opened that spring on South Congress Avenue in Austin, its white walls lined with the colors of 10 long years. Critics called it minimalist, but to me it felt like breathing space. I finally had room to hang everything I once kept rolled in tubes or stacked under the bed. The opening night drew collectors, hotel buyers, and a few faces I remembered from the days when I could barely afford canvas. Olivia stood beside me holding a glass of champagne and whispered, "Remember the ramen." I laughed because I did. Within a year, I signed a licensing deal with a boutique hotel chain that wanted my work for its entire line of properties. The contract was worth $1.3 million, an amount that still looked like a typo every time I read it. Reporters called it poetic justice, though I preferred to think of it as back pay for every time someone told me art does not pay the bills. I hired a small team to help manage orders and exhibitions. My days were a mix of paint paperwork and laughter that did not feel borrowed. I began to enjoy small luxuries again, fresh flowers every week, good coffee music that filled the quiet without asking for attention. Then one afternoon my phone rang with a number from Charleston. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. My mother's voice came through strained but polite. She asked how business was. I said steady. After a pause, she said the roof of her house had started leaking after a storm, and she could not afford the repair. The insurance payout was delayed, and she wondered if I could help. Her tone carried the faint expectation that I would rush to solve it, as if we were still living in the arithmetic of her control. I told her, of course, I would handle it and asked for her mailing address. She sounded relieved, almost tender. "Thank you, Margot," she said. "I knew you would understand." The next day, my assistant drafted an invoice on official letterhead. To Helen Reeves, Art Restoration. Fee $10,000. I added a short note at the bottom: family discount applied. We mailed it express. 3 days later, she called, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You charged your own mother," she said. I replied evenly, "It is a family discount. Normally it is double." There was silence long enough for me to imagine her face turning the same color it had in the museum. She said I was being cruel. I said I was being consistent. After we hung up, I sat by the window of my office and watched a thunderstorm roll over the city. The sky looked like one of my unfinished canvases, dark but alive. I felt neither guilt nor glee, only equilibrium. I paid the roofer directly the next morning, adding the invoice number in the memo line. Balance due $0. Later that week, a journalist from the Chronicle stopped by for an interview about success and family legacy. He asked if my parents were proud. I smiled and said some debts take longer to mature. He laughed, thinking it was metaphor. It was not. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for a new assistant, I asked a candidate if she was comfortable handling emotional baggage. She tilted her head and asked physical or financial. Both I said and offered her the job. She laughed and accepted. Her name was Clara, and she became the most reliable person in my life. She handled the logistics while I handled the ghosts. Together, we built Reeves Atelier into a name that meant something beyond the past. Each year brought new opportunities, international fairs collaborations, and lectures. People quoted my lines about resilience as if they were scripture. It felt surreal, but also strangely calm. The revenge by then had softened into rhythm. Yet sometimes I caught myself scrolling through old photos of Charleston, the oak trees and narrow streets, the house where the smell of lemon polish still haunted me. Joanne called once to say Mom was selling antiques online to cover medical bills. I wired money anonymously through her church, noting it as donation for roof restoration. It was not forgiveness, it was accounting. I kept my distance because peace costs more than pride, and I was finally solvent. In 2022, my work was featured in a national campaign for female entrepreneurs. The headline read, "The Price of Peace." I did not choose the title, but it fit. The day the magazine came out, Clara brought in a cake with the same words written in frosting. We laughed until we cried. That evening, as the gallery emptied, I walked among the paintings alone. Each piece was a receipt proof of survival, proof of growth. My phone buzzed again, another Charleston number. I let it ring out. Some debts are better left uncollected. Outside, the city lights shimmered like wet paint. I thought of all the nights I painted by candlelight, the way the flame flickered and refused to die. That was what peace looked like now. Not applause, not revenge, just the quiet certainty that I had balanced the books. By the spring of 2024, the air in Austin carried the scent of cedar and change. Reeves Atelier had become more than a gallery. It was a small empire of color and quiet triumph. Corporate clients lined up for commissions. Universities invited me to lecture on art and perseverance, and I could finally say that every bill was paid on time. Then, one morning, an email arrived with the subject line, "Family Matter." It was from Joanne. I stared at it for several minutes before opening it. The message was short. "The bank went under. I am out of work. Mom wants to talk." Beneath it was a phone number I recognized but had not used in months. I closed the email and went back to work, but the words stuck to me like paint that would not dry. A week later, my mother appeared at the gallery unannounced. She looked smaller, somehow her confidence chipped away. The receptionist called my office. I almost said to send her away, but curiosity won again. When she entered, she glanced around, eyes darting over the canvases as if afraid to touch the air. "You have done well," she said finally. I nodded, waiting. "Joanne lost her job," she continued. "The whole branch closed. She needs work, Margot. You could help her." The tone was not a request. It was the same old command disguised as concern. I asked why Joanne did not come herself. Mom hesitated. "She is embarrassed." I said, "About what?" "Taking from me again." My mother's jaw tightened. "You owe your sister that chance," she said softly. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. I owed her $50,000 once, remember? The college fund. The color drained from her face. "That was different," she whispered. "We made mistakes." "No, I said you made choices." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the floor. She started to cry, the kind of crying that comes not from regret, but from habit. I handed her a tissue and said nothing. The next morning, I told Clara to draft a temporary employment agreement for Joanne Reeves. Position gallery assistant, salary $10 per month, duration 3 months probation. I printed it on thick ivory paper and sealed it in a crisp envelope. When Joanne arrived 2 days later, she wore a navy suit too formal for the gallery. Her smile was brittle. "Margot," she began, "thank you for even considering this." I said, "Everyone deserves a fresh start." She relaxed slightly, signed the contract without reading past the first paragraph, and handed it back with a look of cautious relief. As she turned to leave, I said quietly, "Equal pay for equal value, right?" She froze, processing the words, then flipped to the second page and saw the number. Her cheeks flushed red. "This is a joke," she said. I smiled. "No, it is a mirror." She tore the copy in half and stormed out. My staff pretended not to notice, though Clara's lips twitched as she filed the papers. Later that day, I received a call from my mother. "What did you do to her?" she demanded. I said I gave her the same opportunity you gave me, $10 and a lesson. The line went silent before she hung up. I should have felt satisfied, but instead I felt something slower, quieter. Revenge had lost its taste, replaced by clarity. Weeks passed. The story reached Charleston in whispers. Some called me heartless, others called me poetic. I stopped reading either. My work consumed me again until the invitation arrived from the Savannah Art Museum. They wanted to feature Solace at Dawn in a charity auction for educational programs. I agreed on one condition, that the piece be displayed publicly before the bidding. When I arrived for the event, the same glass atrium shimmered in the coastal light. Reporters recognized me instantly, the woman from the viral moment years before. I smiled politely and walked to the front row where the bidding would take place. My mother sat there, dressed elegantly but thinner, her hands clasped tight. She did not notice me at first. On the stage, the auctioneer announced the next item, a painting by renowned artist Margot Reeves titled Solace at Dawn. The crowd murmured with excitement. The opening bid began at $200,000 and climbed quickly. Within minutes, it reached $2 million. Cameras flashed. People gasped. My mother's face turned pale. She stared at the painting as if seeing a ghost. I stepped beside her quietly. Her eyes widened when she realized who stood there. She whispered, "That was the one from the yard sale." I nodded. $10, I said softly. "Best investment you ever made." Her lips trembled. She looked back at the painting as the auctioneer's hammer fell. Sold. The room erupted in applause. The buyer approached me to shake hands, oblivious to the private storm again unfolding a few feet away. My mother remained seated, tears pooling but unshed. I leaned closer and whispered, "Now you pay to see them again." She flinched as if struck, then turned away. I walked toward the stage to thank the audience. The lights felt warm on my face. Cameras clicked again, but this time there was no anger in me, only a strange calm. The past had been tallied, the numbers reconciled. After the ceremony, I stood alone in front of the painting, one last time. The colors seemed brighter than ever. Someone asked if I felt proud. I said, no, just complete. That night I drove back to my hotel by the river. The same streets, the same city, but everything felt smaller, lighter. From my window, I watched the reflection of the bridge lights ripple across the water. Somewhere in Charleston, a roof no longer leaked. A mother counted regrets like unpaid bills, and a sister learned that some debts cannot be refinanced. For me, the ledger was closed. The letter arrived in early spring, written on cream paper with edges slightly frayed, as if handled too many times before being sent. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same looping cursive that once labeled every jar in our kitchen and every envelope of bills stacked by the phone. My mother began simply, "Dear Margot." The words that followed were not grand apologies, but quiet confessions of loneliness. She wrote about the silence in the house, the cracks in the ceiling, the way she sometimes found herself standing before an empty wall trying to imagine color. She said she watched interviews of me on television but could never bring herself to call. She wrote that she was sorry for selling what she never understood, that she had confused control with care. At the end, she asked for nothing. Not forgiveness, not reunion, only the chance to say she finally knew what art was worth. I read the letter 3 times. Each time it felt lighter, as if the ink was fading before my eyes. Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer beside old paint-stained receipts, and sat for a while without moving. That night, I printed a small reproduction of my painting, Hope, and mailed it back to her. On the bottom margin, I wrote, "No refund needed." I did not expect a reply. None came. Months later, Charleston called again, this time not from family but from opportunity. The city's art council offered me the chance to open a permanent gallery space in the restored waterfront district. They wanted to name it Reeves Gallery. I declined politely and suggested something else, Receipt. They hesitated at first, unsure if it sounded too transactional, but when I explained the story, they agreed. The name caught attention long before the opening. Articles called it symbolic closure, a full circle between value and redemption. By the time the gallery was ready in 2025, tourists lined the sidewalks hours before the ribbon cutting. I arrived early wearing a white suit, the same shade as the one from the auction years before. Daniel stood beside me, his hand steady on my back. He had met me long after the chaos, but understood every shadow of it. The walls inside were painted soft gray, designed to let the colors breathe. At the center hung my newest work, Legacy, a large canvas showing 3 figures standing beneath a pale sunrise. The 2 daughters faced the light while the mother lingered behind them, rendered as a silhouette, almost transparent. The critics would later call it my most personal piece. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as photographers gathered near the ribbon. Outside across the street, I saw her. My mother stood alone behind the glass of a nearby cafe, watching quietly. She wore the same pearls she had at the museum, though they seemed duller now. She held the letter I had returned, folded into a square. For a moment, our eyes met through the reflection of the window. She looked as if she wanted to step closer, but could not. I did not move. When the mayor finished his short speech, he handed me the scissors. The red ribbon fell with a soft sound, and the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, flashes bounced off the white walls, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with perfume. People walked in, admiring the pieces, whispering about the title. One woman said to another, "It is poetic how she named it after her first revenge painting." I smiled faintly. Daniel leaned closer and asked quietly, "Will you let her in?" I watched my mother still standing by the window, the glass reflecting the morning light across her face. "Forgiveness is not admission," I said. "It is closure." He nodded and squeezed my hand. The crowd moved around us, laughter echoing under the high ceilings. A journalist approached, asking about the significance of the title. I told him receipt is not about money. It is about proof. proof that what was dismissed as worthless can become priceless once it is seen for what it truly is. Later, as the event wound down, I slipped away from the crowd and stood before Legacy. The light from the skylight shifted across the canvas, illuminating the faint outline of the mother's figure. For the first time, I did not feel anger. I felt distance, calm and clean. And Daniel joined me carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "To peace," he said. "To balance," I replied. Outside, the street had grown quiet. My mother was gone, leaving only a folded napkin on the cafe table. When I stepped closer to the window, I could see what she had written on it. Beautiful work. I let the note stay where it was. Some words belonged to the air more than the page. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the gallery alone. The paintings glowed faintly in the dim light colors, alive even in silence. I thought of every version of myself that had led here, the girl painting by candlelight, the woman packing boxes, the artist standing before her own reflection. Each of them had paid a price. Each of them had collected something in return. Before turning off the lights, I stopped once more before Legacy. The brushstrokes seemed to pulse gently alive with the weight of everything said and unsaid. I whispered a small thank you to the shadow in the painting, not for love, but for the lesson. Then I turned to leave. As the doors closed behind me, I could hear faint applause from the street. The lingering echo of strangers moved by what they could not fully understand. The night air was cool against my face. Somewhere far away, church bells rang slow and forgiving. I walked to the car with Daniel and looked back one last time at the sign above the door. Receipt. It glowed softly in the dark, steady as a heartbeat. Voiceover. If you have ever been told your dream was worthless, tell me what is its price now.